Hey everyone, my name is Haley. Welcome back to another video. Hope you all are doing well and still sane in your self-isolation. Today I wanted to talk about kind of this whole situation and what to do in this period of waiting. I know that I've been battling a little bit with some impatience and a little bit of discouragement. When am I able to leave my house and see my friends again and see the people that I care about and do the things that I love to do outside of these walls of my house? And some of you might be battling with that too. And God, when is this going to end? What are you trying to do here? And so it's funny how this kind of relates to where I am in my Bible study right now. Like personally, I've been studying the book of Genesis and the story of Abram and who later becomes Abraham. But I thought I would just kind of share with you a couple of different instances where Abram and his wife were in times of waiting, and how when they took matters into their own hands and lost faith in God, it made their lives a lot harder than they had to be. So I'm going to dive into Genesis 12. And so the first instance of Abram having to trust God, but then he kind of takes matters into his own hands, is when God calls him and his wife into Negev to serve, but there is a famine there, and so Abram goes to Egypt to wait out the famine. And so I'm going to read from verse 10 here. This is Genesis chapter 12. Now that there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but let you live. Say you are my sister, so that will I be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. And so he's telling his wife to lie to the Egyptians because they would have seen her as a good person to be in the Pharaoh's harem, and she would have been, marveled because of her wealth and a potential political alliance. And so if Abraham told the truth and said, hey, I'm her husband, they would have killed him because she can't be in the harem if she's married. But that's how the custom was, and that's what Abram, at the time, was basing his logic on. And so if he said, hey, I'm her brother, then he would have been honored and rewarded for being related to her. And so the story goes on. Verse 14, when Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. And so, it seems like it's going pretty well. He just a little white lie and, just a little bit of control. He's okay. But what happens next is in verse 17, but the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. And so it says the Lord inflicted serious diseases. God was like, dude, I told you to go there, and you lost your faith in me to protect you. Now, Abraham did go to Egypt, but God called him out of his home. And so when God puts us in a situation, he promises to protect us. He promises to protect the people who trust in him. And so when we take matters into our own hands and don't rely on the timing of God, our life starts to fall apart and it doesn't go in the way that God intended it to go. So unfortunately, this happens again in Genesis 16. I'll be going to Genesis 15. The Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying that he will be the father of many nations. And so the very beginning of chapter 15 says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." So that's God speaking to him. Abram responded, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." So that was another custom of the day. If you didn't have any children to inherit your land, then your servant would do that. Then the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up the sky and count the stars, if you indeed can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall be your offspring." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So God made this promise, made this covenant with Abram, that he will be the father of many nations and have many descendants. So Abram's like, "Okay, awesome, I believe you." That didn't last for very long. In chapter 16, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, obviously. But it says here, "But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.'" That was another tradition of the day. If you were a woman and could not bear children, it was like socially kind of made you lower. And so giving your husband the female servant to have children with was kind of a substitute for that. So it says Abraham, sorry, I keep alternating Abram and Abraham. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows I am pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." And so when Sarai and Abram took those matters into their own hands, it caused conflict between them. Sarai began to become angry at Abram, and then began to get angry at Hagar, the servant, who, just really did what she was told. And so, again, they lost their trust in God, and it didn't take them down the most direct path that he had intended for them. And so from Hagar, Ishmael was born. And so Abram thought that God's covenant was, complete, and that it was like, okay, this is my son. But God repeats in chapter 17 that he will have a son of his own blood. And so at the beginning of 17 in verse 5, he says, "No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." And so at this point, Abram was 99 years old, and Sarai was around 90 as well. And so you could understand why they would be so impatient. That's a long time to be waiting for a child. But again, God's promises are perfect. God's faithful in his promises to us. And so, in verse 15, God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarai your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham fell face down, laughed, and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. And so he's doubting God again here. And it's easy to be like, hey, Abraham, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doubting God, a perfect God? And so God says that he will bless Ishmael and that he will do great things, but the covenant he will establish will be with Isaac, who will be made from Sarah and Abraham. And so, a couple chapters later in chapter 21, verse 1, the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. God's timing is perfect. And I believe that he puts us in times of waiting to become closer to him and to become more trusting in him and faithful and realize his faithfulness. And it's really tempting because we don't see the whole picture right now. We don't know how long this coronavirus is going to last. Now, I don't think we'll have to wait 90 years like Abraham and Sarah did. But, a lot of people have been reminding us that Anne Frank was in her attic for years, hiding from the Nazis. And that's a much more extreme situation than we are in. And not to, undermine any pain that we may be feeling from being away from our loved ones. But we have to recognize that God will deliver those who trust in him from periods of hopelessness or uncertainty. We just have to place our trust in him. And so don't take matters in your own hands and go and, be in those gatherings of people, because we have to be careful in this time of not spreading the disease and really trusting that by keeping ourselves safe in our home, we'll be keeping others safe by staying home and keeping those people that do have to work, like those doctors and nurses and other essential workers, safe from the disease. And so while you're in this period of waiting, continue to pray, continue to seek wisdom in his word and seek encouragement in his word. As I'm reading these stories and what God did in other people's lives, I've been seeing more of God's character and how relevant it is to now, this period of waiting we're in, and how we have to get closer to God in this period of waiting. We forget very easily that God is eternal and that he never changes. And I'll admit, I kind of was forgetting that recently too. I, have been facing a lot of lack of motivation and just, hopelessness and saying, okay, when is this going to end? When am I going to see my friends again? But I find comfort in Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. No matter what time we are in, God is forever with us, even when we don't feel it. Again, our feelings do not dictate what God is. I think it's really easy to get caught up in what we feel versus what actually is. And so in this time of discouragement that I was kind of facing, I prayed before my Bible time this morning, and I was like, God, I need your strength to get through this. And he really, it's so great how when you call him, he delivers. And I came across Psalm 102 as I've been studying the Psalms recently, and it's a lament from this person who's experiencing great hopelessness and weakness. And verse 17 says, he will respond to the prayer of the destitute. He will not despise their plea. So the previous 16 verses, he's been crying out. This author has been crying out to God about how lonely he is and about just the trials he's facing. But he is reminded that God hears our prayers. He listens to us. He knows what we're going through. And verse 27 says, "But you remain the same, and your years will never end." And that really spoke to me. The same God who gave Abraham and Sarah their son after how many years, and it seemed impossible for them to even be physically capable of having a child. He did that. And so in the same way, the same loving, faithful, trustworthy God, he never changes, and we can trust in him to deliver us through this time. And those who wait upon the Lord and trust in the Lord will gain new strength. And so if you need encouragement, pray for strength and a trusting heart, because I battle with it. I battle with trusting God and letting go, and I think we all do. We're all control freaks to some degree as humans. We like control, we like comfort. And this situation is uncomfortable and unknown. Nobody knows anything. But the one known thing is God. And that's why it's so important that we draw close to him in authentic obedience and following him wholeheartedly in this time. Because, he's the only thing we can lean on. And he's the only one who can grant us hope. And when all of this is over, you will find that he can deliver you in all aspects of life if you just let go and trust. And there's a great song by For King and Country called Control that talks about that. And it's just this genuine call out, God, I gave up control. And sometimes I heard this a long time ago, I can't take credit for this, we need to surrender our surrender. And so it's hard to surrender. It's hard to give up control. So you can say, God, I surrender my surrender. I'm surrendering my ability to surrender, and just praying that over and over again. And I'm going to give you another song to listen to called Eye of the Storm by Ryan Stevenson. And this song it means a lot to me. It got me through some pretty dark times, and the chorus is like, in the eye of the storm, you remain in control. And the whole song talks about hardships we face and how even in the center of craziness, God remains in control. God will pull us through. You just have to put your trust in him and let go and ask for help with resisting the urge to just take everything into your own hands, because everything's in God's hands right now. And that's all we really need to know, and that's all we really need. And so, again, I would just pray that you pray to God and seek out his word and his encouragement and dig into the scriptures and see the kind of God that he is, and see that he's a faithful God, and he is a God that delivers us through trials. And so that's all I have for you today. I hope that you found some encouragement in the word of God, and I hope God spoke to you today, and I hope that you can find some hope and, again, some encouragement in this time. And it's okay to feel discouraged, but don't live there. Don't live in that discouragement and hopelessness, because that is where the enemy will grip you and grab you and try to pull you away from God. And I've felt some of that recently. And so just cling close to God, pray to God, and get in his word. And that's honestly like the best advice that I can give you right now. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing this video with a friend. I really appreciate it. I hope that God can just continue to reveal himself to you as you seek him out. Thank you again. God bless you all.